Silence has two forms, you see. There is the silence of peace, the calm stillness before a storm gathers on the horizon. And then there is the silence that is the storm, a quiet, suffocating pressure that builds until the world itself must break. In the sprawling, minimalist mansion of Amelia Hayes, silence had once been a symbol of tranquility, a testament to a life so perfectly constructed that it ran without noise. But on the morning of her 40th birthday, that silence had become a roar, an unspoken scream that signaled the imminent collapse of everything she had ever believed to be true. Amelia awoke to the cold, gray light of dawn filtering through impossibly large windows, the polished concrete floors and stark white walls of her home offering no warmth, no comfort. The house was an architectural marvel, a feature in magazines, but today it felt like a mausoleum. It was empty, utterly and completely empty. There were no handmade cards taped to the refrigerator, no scent of coffee brewing, no clumsy attempts at a surprise breakfast. Her phone, resting on the marble nightstand, was dark and quiet. No notifications, no messages, not one. Her husband, David, had called the night before, his voice a smooth apology about a sudden, unavoidable business trip to Singapore. It was a deal, he'd said, that couldn't wait. Her son, Leo, 19 and drowning in the entitlement she had provided, was on a ski trip with his fraternity brothers. Her daughter, Chloe, 17 and lost in the whirlwind of her own social life, was at a weekend debate tournament. Even Margaret, David's mother, who lived in the guest wing and whose presence was a constant, simmering critique of Amelia's very existence, was conspicuously absent, having left a terse note about visiting her sister. They had all forgotten. The thought landed not with a crash of anger, but with the hollow thud of a stone dropped into a deep, dark well. She, Amelia Hayes, the architect of their lives, the founder and CEO of Innovate Dynamics, the sun around which their comfortable, luxurious worlds orbited, had simply vanished from their consciousness. Later that day, she drove her slate-gray Tesla to a small bakery in a part of town she rarely visited. She bought a single, perfect-looking cupcake, a swirl of vanilla frosting on a red velvet base. Back in her silent kitchen, she placed it on a fine china plate, stuck a single candle in its center, and lit it. She didn't sing aloud. She just watched the small flame dance, a tiny, flickering light in an overwhelming void. This wasn't just about a forgotten birthday. This was the final, devastating confirmation of a truth she had long refused to see. This wasn't the wound. It was merely the drop of salt water that made the true festering injury burn with an agony that would change everything. To understand the depth of that single flickering candle's flame, you must first understand the architect who lit it. Amelia Hayes was not born into the world of glass-walled boardrooms and silent, electric cars. She was forged in the grit of a working-class neighborhood in Cleveland, the only child of a steelworker father and a librarian mother. Her inheritance wasn't a trust fund, it was a ferocious work ethic and an insatiable curiosity about the delicate, complex machinery of life. While other girls played with dolls, Amelia was mapping the human genome on her bedroom wall with colored string. She didn't just see the world, she saw the systems that ran it, the intricate dance of cause and effect, of chemistry and consequence. Her mind was a place of relentless innovation, and she poured every ounce of that brilliance into a single vision, a biotechnology firm that could solve problems others deemed impossible. She named it Innovate Dynamics, a name that was both a promise and a command. She built it from nothing, from late nights fueled by cheap coffee in a rented garage, from patents she filed herself, from investor meetings where men twice her age patted her on the head and told her to find a husband. She found investors anyway. She built her empire not with inherited power, but with sheer, undeniable competence. And then she met David. David Hayes was everything she wasn't. He hailed from a family whose name was etched onto the brass plaques of dusty university buildings and country clubs, a family that possessed the quiet confidence of old money, even if the actual money had dwindled to a faint echo. He was devastatingly handsome, impossibly charming, and he moved through the world with an ease that Amelia, with her relentless drive, had never known. She was the brilliant, unstoppable force. He was the smooth, immovable object of social grace. They were, to the outside world, the perfect power couple. He became her husband and eventually the executive vice president of Innovate Dynamics. It was a title Amelia had created for him, a role that involved shaking hands, playing golf, and being the handsome, affable face of her genius at charity galas. He was a beautiful frame for the masterpiece she was painting, and for a long time, she told herself that every masterpiece needs a frame. But his work began when the sun went down, at cocktail parties and sponsored dinners. Hers began before the sun came up, in labs and intense negotiations with international regulators. He spent the company's money with practiced elegance. She was the one who earned it, who worried over profit margins and research grants in the lonely hours of the night. Living with them, or rather, reigning over the domestic sphere of their shared life, was David's mother, Margaret. A woman carved from granite and disapproval. Margaret had never believed Amelia was worthy of the Hayes family name. To Margaret, Amelia's success was not a sign of brilliance, but a loud, crass display of new money. She saw Amelia's ambition as unladylike, her dedication to her work, a neglect of her true duties as a wife and mother. Margaret's criticisms were never direct attacks. They were subtle, poisonous little barbs delivered with a thin smile. A comment on how Amelia's dress was brave for a woman of her position. A sigh about how the household staff seemed to lack direction. A constant, wistful reminiscence about the women David could have married, women who understood the art of hosting a luncheon rather than the science of gene splicing. Amelia endured it all with a quiet, steely grace, treating Margaret's presence as just another variable in the complex equation of her life, another problem to be managed, not solved. And then there were the children, Leo and Chloe. They were not malicious, not intentionally cruel. They were simply products of a world where every desire was met before it could fully form. They were born into the finished palace, unaware of the back-breaking labor it took to lay the foundation. For them, their mother was not a person so much as a concept, a benevolent, ever-present source of funding. Their conversations with her were almost always transactional. Leo needed a new sports car because his old one, a model from the previous year, was embarrassing. Chloe needed an entirely new wardrobe for a school trip to Paris. Their successes at their elite private schools were presented to Amelia like invoices, achievements that required a financial reward. They loved her, Amelia was sure, in the way one loves a landmark or a utility, a constant, reliable presence that you only truly notice when it's gone. They saw her strength, her boundless capacity to provide, but they never once stopped to consider the cost. They never saw the exhaustion behind her eyes, the worry etched into the fine lines around her mouth. They never saw her. They only saw what she could do for them. So Amelia became the quiet, humming engine of their lives. She was the provider, the problem solver, the silent benefactor who made their glittering world possible. She funded David's lifestyle, absorbed Margaret's disdain, and fulfilled her children's endless list of wants, all while steering a multi-billion-dollar company through the treacherous waters of the global market. She did it because she believed this was the price of having it all. She believed that her sacrifice was the glue holding her family together, the foundation upon which their happiness was built. She had become the forgotten architect, a woman who had designed and constructed a magnificent life for others, only to find that there was no room in it for herself. And on the morning of her 40th birthday, as she sat alone in her vast, silent kitchen, the truth became brutally clear. It wasn't that they had forgotten a single day. It was that they had forgotten the woman who gave them all of their days. And in that chilling realization, the quiet, humming engine in the heart of the Hayes family finally, irrevocably, began to stall. The silence of the house became an active, hostile presence, pressing in on Amelia from all sides. The minimalist decor, once a source of pride, now seemed to mock her, its clean lines and empty spaces, a reflection of her own hollowed-out heart. She had to get out. Taking nothing but her keys, she walked into the cavernous garage and slipped into the driver's seat of her Tesla. The car, a marvel of modern engineering, was just like her home. Silent, powerful, and cold. It usually represented freedom and success. Today, it felt like a high-tech coffin, sealing her away from a world that had seemingly forgotten she existed. She didn't have a destination. She just pressed the accelerator and drove, letting the car's silent glide carry her away from the gilded cage she had built for herself. The suburbs melted into the city into the long, winding roads of the countryside. She drove for hours, a ghost in her own machine, the world outside a meaningless blur. And then the sky broke. The rain began not as a drizzle, but as a sudden, violent deluge, as if the heavens themselves were weeping with a fury she couldn't express. The world dissolved into shades of gray, the rhythmic thud of the wipers beating a frantic, hypnotic tempo against the glass. It was through this watery curtain that she saw him. A man, old and slight, was standing on the shoulder of the deserted road, his thin jacket soaked through, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Beside him, with its hood up like a gaping mouth, was a car that looked like it belonged in a museum, a sputtering, rusted relic that had clearly given up the ghost. Cars, newer and more practical than hers, sped past him, their occupants cocooned in their own dry, warm worlds, unwilling to break the seal. For a moment, Amelia was one of them. A flicker of caution, a lifetime of being told to mind her own business, rose up in her. It was inconvenient. It was potentially unsafe. But then she looked at his face, a mask of weary resignation, and she saw a reflection of her own profound isolation. He was alone, stranded, and invisible. The irony was so sharp, so bitter, that it spurred her to action. This was a problem she could solve. Unlike the slow, creeping decay in her own home, this was a tangible issue with a clear solution. It was a problem that required nothing more than simple, human decency. Overriding the car's sophisticated navigation system, Amelia slowed down and pulled over onto the wet gravel, the electric vehicle's silence almost startling in the roaring rain. She rolled down the window. The man looked up, startled, rainwater dripping from his silver hair. "Having some trouble?" Amelia asked, her voice calm. He nodded, unable to hide his surprise. "The old girl finally decided she's had enough, I'm afraid," he said, his voice raspy but kind. "Can I give you a ride?" she offered. "Get you somewhere warm?" He hesitated for only a second, before a wave of gratitude washed over his features. I would appreciate that more than you know," he stammered. He introduced himself as Arthur, as he carefully settled into the passenger seat, bringing the smell of damp wool and fresh rain into the pristine, leather-scented cabin. He was clearly awed by the car's futuristic interior, but he was polite enough not to comment. Instead of taking him to a sterile service station, Amelia found herself turning down a road she hadn't traveled in years, pulling into the parking lot of a small, old-fashioned diner. It was the kind of place with vinyl booths, a humming neon sign, and the comforting smell of coffee and bacon. It was a world away from the Michelin-starred restaurants where David entertained clients. Inside, she ordered them both coffee and a hot meal. As they sat there, steam rising from their mugs, a strange sort of peace settled over Amelia. For the first time all day, she wasn't Amelia Hayes, the CEO. She was just a woman, sharing a meal with a stranger, two souls sheltering from the same storm. Arthur, it turned out, was a widower. He spoke lovingly of his late wife, Eleanor, and the quiet life they had shared. He didn't complain about his loneliness. He simply stated it as a fact, a new landscape he was still learning to navigate. He had a gentle humor and a sharp, observant mind. He asked Amelia about herself, but not about her work or her success. He asked what she enjoyed doing, what books she liked to read. The questions were so simple, so fundamentally human, that she found herself at a loss for words. When was the last time anyone had asked her that? She listened more than she talked, and in his quiet company, she felt a sense of connection that had been absent from her life for so long it felt like a phantom limb. While he ate, she made a call, arranging and paying for a tow truck to pick up his car and take it to a reputable garage. He protested, but she gently insisted. "Let someone help you, Arthur," she said, the words feeling foreign and right at the same time. After their meal, she drove him home to a small, impeccably neat house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. It was modest and unassuming, a universe away from her own cold, architectural statement of a house. Before he got out, she scribbled her personal cell number on a napkin. "If you need anything, she said. "If the garage gives you any trouble, or you just need a ride, please call." He took the napkin, his eyes shining with an emotion she couldn't quite name. It was more than just gratitude. It was a look of profound, respectful understanding. "Thank you, Amelia," he said, his voice thick with sincerity. "You are a truly kind woman. Don't ever let the world convince you otherwise." As she drove away, the rain had softened to a gentle drizzle. The profound emptiness inside her had not vanished, but something had shifted. A small, warm ember had been lit in the cold, dark cavern of her heart. She didn't know the man's last name. She didn't know what he did for a living or who his family was. He was just a stranger she had helped on the worst day of her life. She thought it would be the end of their story, a fleeting moment of connection soon to be forgotten. She had no way of knowing that this small, unintentional act of kindness, this simple response to another's quiet despair, was not an ending. It was the beginning of everything. It was the first pebble that would trigger an avalanche, destined to bring her entire, carefully constructed world crashing down, so that something new and something true could finally be built in its place. The brief warmth Amelia had felt in the old diner evaporated the moment she stepped back inside her own home. The house was just as she had left it, vast, silent, and indifferent. The single cupcake, with its extinguished candle, still sat on the kitchen island, a pathetic monument to her own solitude. She disposed of it, wiping away the crumbs with a final, decisive gesture, as if erasing the day's sentimental folly. She moved through the rooms of her life, feeling like a ghost, the memory of Arthur's simple kindness, a fading, distant shore. She had retreated into herself, into a state of weary resignation, when the sound of a key turning in the front door echoed through the hall just before 11 o'clock. David was home. He entered not with a quiet shuffle, but with a deliberate, performative energy. He was the picture of the remorseful husband, his tie loosened just so, a look of carefully crafted exhaustion on his handsome face. In his hand, he held a sleek, expensive-looking box from a Fifth Avenue jeweler. "Amy," he began, his voice a low, melodious hum of apology. "I am so sorry. This trip was a nightmare, sprung on me at the last second. But that's no excuse. I know what day it is. I am the worst husband in the world." He enveloped her in a hug that smelled of airport lounges and expensive cologne. He presented the box, which contained a diamond necklace so brilliant it seemed to suck the light from the room. It was exquisite. It was extravagant, and it felt as cold as a stone against her skin. A younger Amelia, an Amelia from a week ago, even from that very morning, would have melted. She would have accepted the apology, worn the necklace, and allowed the sheer expense of the gift to plaster over the hurt. But something had shifted inside her. The woman who had stopped for a stranger in the rain, who had sat in a vinyl booth and listened to stories about a woman named Eleanor, was not the same. She found herself observing her husband's performance with a strange, clinical detachment. She played her part, of course. She smiled a tired smile. "It's beautiful, David. Thank you." She let him kiss her, a brief, dry press of lips. "I know work is crazy right now," she said, the practiced words of the supportive wife falling easily from her lips. "Don't worry about it." He seemed satisfied, relieved that his grand gesture had worked its usual magic. He spoke of the deal in Singapore, using vague, impressive-sounding terms, and she nodded along, her mind 1,000 miles away. Later, in the suffocating silence of their bedroom, sleep would not come. The events of the day played on a loop in her mind. The echoing emptiness of the morning, the violent rain, Arthur's kind eyes, and David's flawless, theatrical apology. The diamond necklace lay on her dresser, glittering in the moonlight, feeling less like a gift and more like a bribe, a payment for services rendered, or perhaps for services yet to come. Her throat was dry. Deciding a glass of water might calm the turmoil in her thoughts, she slipped out of bed, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. The house at night was a place of deep shadows and strange acoustics. The soft hum of the sub-zero refrigerator, the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall, sounds she never noticed during the day were now amplified in the stillness. As she neared the bottom of the sweeping staircase, she heard it, a voice, David's voice, low and urgent, seeping from under the door of his study. He was supposed to be asleep. A prickle of unease ran down her spine. It wasn't the sound of a late-night business call. This was different. This was clandestine. She moved closer, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name, a primal sense of danger. She held her breath and pressed her ear against the cool, solid oak of the door. He was talking to his mother. "Margaret." "No, the transfer has to be timed perfectly," David was saying, his voice stripped of its usual charm, now sharp and conspiratorial. "We move too soon. The board will get spooked." There was a pause, and Amelia could almost hear Margaret's reedy, avaricious tone on the other end of the line. "Just a few more of the smaller shareholders need to be convinced," David continued. "The power of attorney documents she signed last year give me all the latitude I need for the asset allocation. She thinks it's for tax efficiency. Asset allocation, power of attorney." These were not the words of a repentant husband. These were the words of a predator. A cold dread, heavy and metallic, began to pool in her stomach. Then, Margaret must have asked the crucial question, because David's next words were spoken with a dismissive, chilling certainty. They were the words that would shatter Amelia's world into a million irreparable pieces. "Don't worry about her," he said, and she could hear the sneer in his voice. "She suspects nothing. She's too busy playing the martyr over a forgotten birthday. She's emotional, not strategic. Just a few more months, Mother. A few more months, and Innovate Dynamics, all of it, will finally be ours. Ours." The word struck Amelia with the force of a physical blow. The air left her lungs. The blood in her veins turned to ice. It wasn't just a business takeover. It was a complete and utter demolition of her life, planned and executed by the two people who were supposed to be her family. The forgotten birthday wasn't an oversight. It was a symptom of their profound contempt. In their eyes, she was already gone, a ghost haunting her own success, a problem to be managed until she could be discarded. Every shared laugh, every tender touch, every whispered promise from the past 20 years instantly replayed in her mind, now tainted, twisted into a grotesque parody of love. She backed away from the door, her movements impossibly slow, her limbs numb. She made no sound. She retreated up the stairs, a phantom in her own home, and slipped back into the bed she shared with the enemy. David came in a few minutes later, moving silently in the dark. He slid under the covers, his body warm beside her. The proximity was nauseating. The man lying inches from her was a stranger, a monster wearing her husband's face. She lay there, rigid, feigning sleep, her eyes wide open in the darkness. The first crack in the facade of her life had become a gaping, terrifying chasm, and she was staring directly into the abyss. And in that abyss, she saw not despair, but the cold, hard, glittering truth. The war had already been declared. She had just, finally, heard the battle cry. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception. Amelia Hayes, who had built her life on the solid foundations of logic and empirical data, now found herself living in a world of pure fiction. She became the star performer in a one-woman play, staged in the theater of her own home. She would sit at the breakfast table, across from the man who was methodically planning her destruction, and discuss mundane things like the weather or the stock market. She would listen to Margaret complain about the quality of the coffee, nodding sympathetically, while every cell in her body screamed with the knowledge of the woman's treachery. Every smile was a lie. Every touch was a betrayal. Every shared meal was poison. She moved through her life with a chilling, newfound clarity, observing David and his mother as a scientist observes a deadly virus under a microscope, studying their patterns, their weaknesses, their every move, all while maintaining the placid, unsuspecting exterior of the perfect wife and daughter-in-law. It was the most exhausting work of her life, and she was doing it utterly alone. This suffocating isolation lasted for 4 days. On the 5th day, a package arrived. It didn't come through the efficient, transparent system of the Innovate Dynamics mailroom. It was delivered by a quiet, stone-faced courier who requested her signature personally, bypassing her assistant and any corporate record. The box was plain, brown, and bore no return address. A cold knot of apprehension and curiosity tightened in Amelia's stomach. She took it into her private office, locked the door, and stared at the anonymous object on her desk. With a surgeon's precision, she sliced through the tape. Inside, there was no bomb, no threatening message, just black foam padding cradling 2 items. The first was a phone, sleek, heavy, and featureless, the kind she knew was designed for untraceable, encrypted communication. The second was a single piece of thick, cream-colored cardstock. Engraved upon it, in elegant, understated script, were just a few words. Kindness should be rewarded. Betrayal should not. I can help. A.H. A.H. Arthur Harrison, the kind old man from the diner. The blood drained from her face. How? How could he possibly know? Her mind raced through 1,000 frantic possibilities. Was he connected to David? Was this some elaborate, cruel trick? Another layer of the conspiracy designed to unnerve her, to make her paranoid? But the memory of his eyes, the genuine warmth of their conversation, fought against the rising tide of suspicion. He hadn't seemed like a conspirator. He had seemed authentic. And the message itself, it wasn't a threat. It was an offer. A lifeline. But a lifeline from whom? And how did he know she was drowning? For 24 hours, she did nothing. The phone and the note sat locked in her desk drawer, a silent, powerful question she was too afraid to answer. She was alone in a war zone, and she had no allies. Her lawyers? David had cultivated relationships with all of them. Her board of directors? David had charmed and manipulated many of them for years. The police? She had no concrete proof, only a fragment of an overheard conversation. To reveal her hand now would be strategic suicide. This strange, impossible package was the only variable, the only move on the chessboard that David and Margaret hadn't anticipated. It was a terrifying risk, but doing nothing was a certain death sentence. The next afternoon, she slipped out of the office, telling her assistant she had a headache. She drove to a public park, a place with no cameras she could see, and found a secluded bench overlooking a duck pond. The burner phone felt cold and heavy in her hand. She turned it on. The screen lit up with a simple, secure interface. There was only one contact, a single entry labeled benefactor. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed the call button. It rang twice, a strange, digital tone, before a voice answered. It was him. It was Arthur's voice, calm and familiar, yet now imbued with an undeniable resonance of power that she had not perceived in the diner. "Amelia," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. "I'm glad you called." "Arthur? How did you? Who are you?" Her voice was a strained whisper. "Who I am is a long story," he replied gently. "Let's start with what I am. I'm a man who believes in fairness, and what is happening to you is not fair." He paused, letting his words sink in. "When we met, Amelia, I was struck by your character. It is a personal hobby of mine to understand the people I meet, so I had my associates conduct a discreet inquiry. A simple background check. It's standard for me." Amelia felt a chill. "Associates? Inquiry?" "My team," he continued, "are very, very good at what they do. They found things. Financial discrepancies within Innovate Dynamics. Shell corporations with familiar names on the board. A pattern of asset movement that was predatory. Your husband and his mother are not just planning to take your company, Amelia. They have been bleeding it dry for years." Every word was a confirmation of her worst fears, a cold, hard fact laid bare. "But why would you care?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Because I spent my life building things," he said, and for the first time, she heard a steel edge in his voice. "And I have no tolerance for termites who infest a house someone else built. You are a builder, Amelia. They are parasites. It's that simple. Your kindness to me that day, when you had every reason to be consumed by your own troubles, showed me what kind of person you are. I decided then that the termites would not be allowed to win." He then told her his full name, Arthur Harrison. The name itself didn't mean much to her, but the name he said he used to be known by in the world of high finance, a world he had abandoned decades ago, made her stop breathing. He was the ghost of Wall Street, a legendary, almost mythical figure, a reclusive tycoon who had built and dismantled fortunes from the shadows before vanishing from public view entirely. The man whose car she had helped fix was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the world. The absurdity of it all was almost too much to comprehend. He wasn't offering sympathy, he was offering an arsenal. "David believes he is playing a game of chess," Arthur said, his voice now crisp and strategic. "He is, in fact, playing checkers, and he is about to find himself up against a grandmaster. I am offering you my resources, Amelia. A team of the best forensic accountants, private investigators, and legal strategists money can buy. They will answer only to you. We will not just stop your husband. We will dismantle his entire scheme, piece by piece, and we will do it in such a way that he will never see it coming." Amelia sat on the park bench, the sounds of children playing and ducks quacking a surreal backdrop to the conversation that was rewriting her future. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen of the phone. The woman staring back at her was no longer a victim. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. A cold, burning ember of rage. A flicker of hope. She had a choice. She could crumble or she could fight. With Arthur Harrison in her corner, she would not be fighting alone. She would be fighting with an army. She took a deep breath, the first truly steady breath she had taken in days. "Okay, Arthur," she said, her voice clear and firm, the tremble completely gone. "Tell me what I need to do." The war was still a secret, but the balance of power had just irrevocably shifted. The alliance with Arthur Harrison was not just a promise of help, it was an induction into a different world, a world that operated in the shadows with silent, lethal efficiency. 2 days after her momentous phone call, Amelia was directed to a nondescript commercial building in the city's warehouse district. There were no signs, no logos, just a gray door that opened into a space that felt less like an office and more like the nerve center of a covert intelligence agency. This was Arthur's world. Waiting for her inside were not stuffy lawyers in pinstripe suits, but a trio of professionals who exuded a quiet, formidable competence. There was Julian, the lead investigator, a man in his 50s with the calm, watchful eyes of a hawk who had seen every form of human deceit. There was Evelyn, a forensic accountant in her late 30s whose sharp, analytical gaze seemed to see straight through spreadsheets and into the corrupt hearts of men. And there was Marcus, a digital forensics expert who looked barely old enough to vote, but whose fingers moved across a keyboard with the fluid grace of a concert pianist. This was Arthur's team. They were the ghosts who audited empires, the whisper network that could uncover any secret, and now they worked for her. Amelia, accustomed to being the one in command, found herself in the novel position of being a client, but she quickly proved to be a partner. She laid out the corporate structure of Innovate Dynamics, the key personnel, David's routines, Margaret's habits, and her assistant Sarah's level of access. She provided every piece of the puzzle she had, and the team immediately set to work, weaving the disparate threads into a coherent, horrifying tapestry. The first thread they pulled was the most personal. Julian's team was discreet and swift. Within 48 hours, they had proof of the affair. It was not a passionate, reckless fling. It was a calculated, long-term partnership. They presented Amelia with a file containing not just grainy surveillance photos of David and Sarah meeting at a boutique hotel downtown, but copies of encrypted messages recovered by Marcus. Amelia read them with a steady hand, her face a mask of stone. The messages were not love notes, they were business communications. Sarah provided David with Amelia's schedule, alerted him to her moods, forwarded him confidential emails, and gave him the passwords to Amelia's private servers. She was not just the other woman, she was the spy in the heart of Amelia's camp, a viper Amelia had welcomed into her inner sanctum, mentored, and trusted implicitly. The personal betrayal was sickening, but the strategic betrayal was, in its own way, even worse. While Julian confirmed the infidelity, Evelyn went hunting for the money. She described her process to Amelia not as accounting, but as archaeology, digging through layers of digital sediment to find the bones of the crime. She started with David's and Margaret's personal finances, which were surprisingly modest. "That's the first red flag," Evelyn explained, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the chase. "Greedy people who are trying to hide their wealth never live a life that matches their declared income. The real money is always somewhere else." And she found it. She unearthed the existence of a shell corporation, Apex Holdings, registered in the Cayman Islands. The listed directors were anonymous proxies, but by peeling back the layers of international corporate law, she found the true beneficial owner. The signature on the final document was David Hayes. From there, the dam of their deception broke. Evelyn traced a complex web of transactions, a slow, methodical siphoning of millions of dollars from Innovate Dynamics over the past 3 years. The methods were insidious and clever. There were consulting fees paid to Apex Holdings for services never rendered. There were ghost invoices from suppliers that didn't exist. There were inflated expense reports from David's endless business trips, where 5-star hotels became palatial presidential suites and business dinners for 2 were billed as corporate banquets for 20. Margaret, too, was involved, receiving a generous stipend from Apex for her role as a silent, complicit partner. They were not just stealing from the company, they were using Amelia's own money to finance the war against her. But the most devastating blow, the discovery that struck at the very heart of Amelia's soul, came from Marcus. Working from a mirrored copy of the Innovate Dynamics servers, he uncovered the full extent of their digital heist. It was a systematic theft of her life's work. He was smart, Marcus admitted, pointing to a complex diagram of data flows on a massive screen. He used Sarah's credentials to access the R&D servers. He never downloaded large batches at once. It was a slow drip, small encrypted files transferred late at night to an external server. A server, of course, owned by Apex Holdings. On the screen, Marcus pulled up a list of the stolen files. It was everything. The proprietary formulas for their most profitable drugs, the raw data from years of clinical trials, the entire client database, and most horrifyingly, the complete research portfolio for Project Nightingale, a revolutionary gene editing technology that Amelia believed would be her legacy, her gift to the world. They hadn't just been stealing money to take over her company. They had been stealing the company's future to build a rival, leaving her with nothing but an empty shell. In the sterile, quiet command center, the team presented their complete findings. The evidence was displayed across a wall of monitors, bank statements, surveillance photos, server logs, intercepted emails. It was the complete, unvarnished anatomy of a betrayal so profound and all-encompassing that it defied comprehension. Arthur was present, watching Amelia, his expression unreadable. Her team expected tears, an outburst of rage, a breakdown. They saw none of it. Amelia stood before the wall of evidence, her posture perfect, her hands clasped behind her back. The pain was there, a cold, heavy weight in her chest, but it was being rapidly consumed by something else, a profound, icy calm. The raw emotion of the betrayed wife was crystallizing into the focused, diamond-hard resolve of a queen whose kingdom was under siege. She looked at the photo of David and Sarah laughing together at a cafe, and she felt nothing but a distant, analytical curiosity. The man she had loved was gone, replaced by this stranger, this common thief. She turned to face her team, her eyes clear and resolute. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "This is everything I need. Now, let's talk about our next move." They saw in that moment that Amelia Hayes was not a client to be protected. She was a commander, and she had just been handed the complete battle plans of her enemy. The web of their lies had been fully exposed. Now, with the truth as her thread, she would begin to weave a web of her own, and hers would be a trap from which there would be no escape. Armed with the cold, hard proof of a comprehensive betrayal, the most natural human impulse would have been to confront, to scream, to rage, to throw the damning evidence at the feet of the guilty and watch them squirm. But Amelia Hayes was no longer operating on impulse. Her grief and shock had been alchemized in the cold fire of truth, forged into something far more dangerous, a diamond, hard, calculated patience. In a secure video conference with Arthur Harrison, he had confirmed her own chilling conclusion. "A cornered animal is unpredictable," he advised, his voice a calm anchor in her storm. "They will lash out, destroy evidence, hide their assets, and turn your truth into a messy, public battle of he said, she said. Right now, they believe they are in control. That is your single greatest advantage. Let them continue to believe it. Let them grow fat and confident on their arrogance. We do not want a messy fight, Amelia. We want a public execution. And so, the mask was forged. Amelia didn't just pretend that nothing was wrong. She began to perform the role of the perfect, oblivious wife and daughter-in-law with an Oscar-worthy dedication. Her transformation was subtle, yet profound. The quiet, work-focused woman, who had often seemed distant, became warmer, more present. The mask she chose was not one of stoicism, but of serene, contented affection. It was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. The family dinners became her stage. One evening, David, emboldened by his belief in her ignorance, began to speak about his future plans. "You know, darling," he said, swirling the expensive wine in his glass, "I've been networking with some venture capitalists. There's a new biotech startup on the horizon that could be revolutionary. I'm thinking of getting in on the ground floor." He was testing her, probing for any sign of suspicion. He was talking, of course, about the company he planned to build with her stolen research. Amelia looked up from her plate, her expression a perfect blend of admiration and wifely support. "David, that's incredible," she said, her voice warm and genuine. "You've always had such a brilliant eye for these things. If anyone can do it, you can. I'm so proud of you." As he preened under her praise, she thought to herself, "He's getting cocky. He's starting to believe his own lies." The encouragement she offered was not a lie. It was a shovel, and she was cheerfully inviting him to dig his own grave a little deeper. Her relationship with Margaret underwent a similar, chilling evolution. The old woman's barbs continued, a steady drip of acidic commentary. One afternoon, Margaret criticized the floral arrangements Amelia had chosen for the foyer. "Lilies," Margaret sniffed. "So funereal." In the past, Amelia would have absorbed the comment with a tight-lipped silence. Now, she turned to her mother-in-law with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Margaret, you're absolutely right," she said brightly. "My mind has been so preoccupied with work, I can't seem to focus on the details that make a house a home. You have such impeccable taste. Perhaps you could oversee the household accounts? I would trust your judgment completely." Margaret was visibly stunned, then flattered. The idea of controlling the household budget, of having official dominion, was irresistible. She didn't realize that Amelia, through Evelyn, had already flagged the household accounts as one of Margaret's smaller avenues of embezzlement. Amelia wasn't ceding control. She was handing her enemy a loaded pen, knowing a full audit was coming. The most difficult performance, the one that required every ounce of her self-control, was with Sarah. Every morning, her assistant would greet her with a bright, cheerful smile, bringing her coffee just the way she liked it. And Amelia would smile back, thank her, and act as if she didn't know that this same young woman was sleeping with her husband and methodically gutting her company. One afternoon, Amelia called Sarah into her office. The girl entered, her notebook ready, a picture of professional loyalty. "Sarah," Amelia began, her tone serious. Sarah's smile faltered for a second. "I just wanted to thank you," Amelia continued. "I know I've been distracted lately, and you have been an absolute rock. Your loyalty and hard work do not go unnoticed." She slid a small box across the desk. It was a pair of designer earrings, a small token of my appreciation. Sarah was speechless, a flicker of what looked like genuine guilt crossing her face before being replaced by relief and a triumphant little gleam. She gushed with thanks, promising to always be there for Amelia. As Sarah left the office, Amelia's own smile faded, her eyes turning to chips of ice. The earrings weren't a gift, they were a brand. Behind this flawless facade, Amelia was living a secret second life. Her home was no longer a sanctuary, it was an observation post. She was a field agent gathering intelligence in enemy territory. She noted every whispered phone call David took, every unexpected errand Margaret ran, every nervous glance from Sarah. At night, while David slept soundly beside her, the sleep of a man with no conscience, Amelia would retreat to the vast, soundproofed space of her walk-in closet. There, under the soft glow of a single light, she would communicate with her team on the encrypted phone. The silent taps of her fingers, a stark contrast to the quiet breathing of the man in the next room. Margaret just received a courier package from a law firm in the Caymans. She would text Julian. "David is meeting someone at the Oak Room Bar at 2 p.m. tomorrow. He thinks I'm in a board meeting." She was no longer a passive victim receiving information. She was an active director of the operation, feeding her team real-time intelligence, guiding their focus, her mind sharper and more ruthless than ever before. Her mask of serenity was not just a defense, it was her greatest weapon. It lulled her enemies into a state of absolute complacency, allowing them to walk, smiling and confident, deeper and deeper into the darkness. They thought she was a pawn in their game, a queen about to be toppled. They never realized she had been the one controlling the board all along. Weeks of silent observation had provided Amelia and her team with a perfect, high-resolution map of the enemy's mind. They knew the landscape of their greed, the contours of their arrogance, and the precise coordinates of their blind spots. It was time to stop mapping the terrain and start reshaping it. The strategy shifted from passive intelligence gathering to active psychological warfare. The objective, as Arthur Harrison calmly articulated it from his remote location, was simple. A predator is most dangerous when it is hungry and cautious. We must make our predator feel so full, so utterly confident of the kill, that it becomes slow and stupid. We are going to feed him the most beautiful, irresistible, and entirely fictional meal of his life. And so, Project Chimera was born. It was a masterpiece of fabrication, constructed in the digital forges of Arthur's team. Marcus, the tech wizard, built its foundation, creating a labyrinth of phantom data within Innovate Dynamics servers. He fabricated years of research notes, simulated lab results, complete with photorealistic cellular imagery, and even created encrypted correspondence between Amelia and a non-existent team of geneticists at Cambridge. Evelyn, the accountant, then dressed this digital skeleton in the flesh of impossible wealth. She drafted flawless financial projections, models that showed Chimera a supposed universal cancer therapy, generating profits that would make Innovate Dynamics the most valuable company on the planet. Julian, the investigator, added the final, human touch, crafting a narrative of secrecy and breakthrough, a story of a legacy project Amelia had been nurturing in secret for over a decade. Project Chimera was the perfect bait, a gilded, glittering prize that promised not just riches, but immortality, a place in the history books. Now, they had to ensure the predator found the meal. The leak was designed as a multi-layered seduction of David's ego. The first move was Amelia's. One evening, knowing David was in his study next door, she took a call in her library. She paced by the open doorway, speaking in hushed, excited tones into her phone, her voice carrying just enough for him to overhear. The call was to Julian, who was playing the part of a Swiss patent attorney. "The Phase 3 trial results are conclusive, Klaus," Amelia whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "The efficacy it's beyond our wildest dreams. We need to fast-track the FDA submission for Chimera. Keep this under the tightest possible wraps. No one can know until we are ready." She hung up and stood for a moment, pressing a hand to her chest as if overwhelmed. Then, she calmly walked away, leaving the seeds of Chimera planted firmly in her husband's greedy mind. As they predicted, the overheard conversation sent David and Sarah into a frenzy. The next day, from a remote terminal, Marcus watched as Sarah used her credentials to begin probing Amelia's private server directories, searching for the keyword Chimera. Marcus allowed her access, but not easily. He created a series of firewalls and security protocols that were just complex enough to make her feel like a brilliant hacker when she finally bypassed them. And then, she hit the jackpot. A folder, labeled ACHLEGACYULTRA, opened up to reveal the entire, beautifully fabricated world of Project Chimera. The data, the financials, the future. Within minutes, the files were being copied to an external server. David didn't just have a rumor anymore. He had the proof. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. David, who already saw himself as a strategic genius, now believed he had uncovered the secret to eternal power and wealth. His caution evaporated, replaced by a frantic, all-consuming urgency. He saw the future. The stock price of Innovate Dynamics skyrocketing into the stratosphere once Chimera was announced. He had to gain absolute control of the company before that happened. This was no longer just a plan, it was a race against time. He immediately began to liquidate the embezzled funds from the Apex Holdings accounts, funneling the cash into a brokerage account under a different name. But the stolen money wasn't enough. He needed more capital, and he needed it now. Confident in his inevitable spectacular return on investment, he did something truly reckless. He reached out to high-risk, offshore lenders, modern-day loan sharks who operated in the gray fringes of international finance. He leveraged everything he had and everything he expected to have, taking on tens of millions of dollars in high-interest debt, a ticking time bomb of financial ruin that he was blissfully unaware of. With a war chest full of stolen and borrowed money, David began his final assault, buying up a controlling interest in Innovate Dynamics stock. He targeted the smaller, independent shareholders, retired professors, early-stage investors, long-time employees. He approached them with charm and a handsome offer, slightly above market value, making them feel like they were getting the deal of a lifetime. What David never knew was that his hunt was a carefully managed safari, and his prey were all decoys. Weeks earlier, Arthur Harrison's network had quietly and discreetly approached these same shareholders, buying their stock outright for a generous premium and signing them to strict non-disclosure agreements. The shareholders David was now meeting were, in fact, agents and associates of Arthur's, actors playing a part, who would cheerfully sell him the very shares Arthur now controlled. In a quiet coffee shop, David negotiated with a retiring university professor who fretted about his pension. The professor, a former stage actor hired by Julian, eventually, and reluctantly, agreed to sell his 2% stake. David transferred millions into his account, feeling the thrill of a successful conquest. The money was immediately wired from the actor's account to one of Arthur's holding companies. 2 days later, David convinced a nervous tech investor in a hotel bar to part with her shares. Another transaction, another victory. He was a shark in a feeding frenzy, devouring every share he could find, never realizing that the water was an aquarium and the zookeeper was smiling, patiently feeding him his own ruin, one expensive bite at a time. At the end of 3 frantic weeks, David sat in his study, a glass of impossibly expensive scotch in his hand, and looked at his portfolio. He had done it. Between his existing shares and his newly acquired ones, he now controlled 52% of Innovate Dynamics. He was the majority shareholder. He was the king. He savored the feeling of absolute victory, the sweet taste of his imminent triumph. The gilded bait had been taken, the hook swallowed whole. He believed he was standing on the summit of his life's ambition, the master of his own destiny. He was, in fact, standing on a trapdoor, poised over a bottomless pit, and the woman he had so foolishly dismissed as emotional and weak was standing just out of sight, her hand resting calmly on the lever. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. All that was needed now was a stage, a grand theater for the final act of this tragedy. And so, Amelia planned a party. It was billed as the 15th anniversary gala for Innovate Dynamics, a lavish, no-expense-spared celebration of a decade and a half of innovation. The invitations were sent to a meticulously curated list of over 500 people, the city's financial elite, influential journalists, the company's most important investors, loyal board members, and every single employee, from the senior scientists down to the janitorial staff. It was to be a night of triumph, a public spectacle of success. But Amelia knew it was something else entirely. It was a scaffold, beautifully decorated and brilliantly lit, upon which the lives of 3 people would be publicly and irrevocably dismantled. The night of the gala arrived, a clear, cold evening glittering with promise. The ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel had been transformed. Thousands of white orchids hung suspended in the air. Crystal chandeliers cast a diamond-like shimmer over the room, and a string orchestra played softly as guests in tuxedos and couture gowns mingled, their laughter echoing over the clinking of champagne flutes. The atmosphere was electric, charged not only with celebration, but with a palpable current of anticipation. Amelia, through carefully orchestrated whispers, had let it be known that the evening would culminate in a major announcement regarding the future leadership of the company. Everyone in that room believed they were there to witness a coronation. David, Margaret, and Sarah arrived as conquering heroes. David was the very image of the CEO in waiting, his tuxedo perfectly tailored, his smile radiating a confident, easy charm. He moved through the crowd like a politician on election night, shaking hands, accepting pats on the back, and modestly deflecting premature congratulations. Margaret, draped in emeralds and an air of regal satisfaction, was the proud matriarch, finally seeing her son ascend to his rightful throne, a victory she felt was owed to her family's name. And beside them, in a daring red dress, was Sarah. She played the part of the loyal, indispensable assistant, but her eyes shone with a triumphant, possessive gleam every time she looked at David. They were the royal family of this new dynasty, basking in the warm glow of a victory they believed was already won, completely oblivious to the fact that they were the honored guests at their own execution. Then Amelia made her entrance. A hush fell over the room as she appeared at the top of the grand staircase. She was wearing a gown of deep, iridescent blue, a color that seemed to shift from sapphire to black, like the quiet depths of the ocean. She was a vision of breathtaking elegance and almost unnerving serenity. Her smile was calm, her movements graceful and unhurried. As she descended the stairs, she didn't look like a woman about to be usurped. She looked like a queen in absolute command of her court. She greeted her guests with warmth, then joined David at his side, taking his arm and smiling up at him as if he were the center of her universe. To the unsuspecting crowd, they were the ultimate power couple, a portrait of shared success. To Amelia, his touch felt like the cold, dry grasp of a snake, but her expression never wavered. Her mask of serenity was flawless. The evening progressed in a symphony of calculated perfection. A decadent dinner was served. A city councilman gave a glowing tribute to Innovate Dynamics and its contributions to the community. A senior board member, a man loyal to Amelia, gave a heartfelt speech about the company's early days. All the while, the tension and anticipation in the room continued to build. David sat at the head table, basking in the accolades, occasionally glancing at the note cards for the victory speech he had prepared. He was so close he could taste it. Finally, the moment arrived. The orchestra fell silent. The master of ceremonies stepped to the podium, and now his voice boomed. "It is my distinct honor to introduce the visionary founder, the brilliant mind, and the guiding force behind 15 years of unparalleled success, the president and CEO of Innovate Dynamics, Miss Amelia Hayes." A wave of thunderous applause swept through the ballroom as Amelia detached herself from David's side, gave his hand a gentle squeeze, and walked gracefully to the stage. A single spotlight illuminated her as she stood at the podium. The vast room was utterly silent. Hundreds of pairs of eyes were fixed on her, waiting. She began to speak, her voice calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the ballroom. She spoke of the company's journey, from a humble garage to a global powerhouse. She thanked her dedicated employees, her brilliant scientists, and her steadfast investors. Her words were full of grace and humility. Then she turned her gaze to the head table, her eyes locking directly onto David's. "Of course," she said, a warm smile gracing her lips, "none of this would have been possible without the unwavering support of my family, especially my husband, David." David beamed, puffing out his chest as a ripple of appreciative murmurs went through the crowd. His ambition and his unique talent for forging new partnerships have been a true inspiration. He has shown me what it truly means to be a visionary. She let the words hang in the air for a moment. In honor of our 15-year journey, and in celebration of the kinds of partnerships that truly define a company's future, I've prepared a short video for all of you tonight. She looked at David, her smile unwavering. I believe you'll find it unforgettable." Her speech was over. She took a small step back from the podium. From his seat, David looked utterly triumphant, believing his moment had finally come. Amelia gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the back of the room, to the audio-visual booth where Marcus sat waiting, his finger poised over a button. The main lights in the grand ballroom began to dim, plunging the chattering crowd into an expectant darkness. The only light came from the stage and from the three massive, cinema-sized screens that formed the backdrop. The Innovate Dynamics logo, a symbol of her life's work, glowed for a moment on the screens, then faded to black. A collective breath was held. 500 people leaned forward in their seats, their faces illuminated by the faint glow, waiting for the tribute to begin. The silence was absolute. The spring was coiled. The trap was about to snap shut. The blackness on the giant screens held for 3 long, silent seconds. In the expectant hush of the grand ballroom, you could have heard a diamond drop. David Hayes, seated at the head table, wore the confident, indulgent smile of a man about to receive his crown. Margaret, his mother, had a look of regal impatience. Sarah, the assistant, leaned forward, her eyes bright with anticipation. They, like everyone else in the room, were waiting for a montage of corporate achievements, of smiling faces and soaring stock charts. The first image that flickered to life was not the gleaming facade of the Innovate Dynamics headquarters. It was the grainy, time-stamped footage from a security camera in a dimly lit hotel bar. The date on the screen was from 6 months prior. The image was clear enough for everyone to recognize 2 people sitting at a secluded table, their heads close together, David Hayes and his wife's personal assistant, Sarah. A low murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. The scene cut to a different angle, this time from a camera discreetly placed in the hotel's hallway. It showed David and Sarah walking down the corridor, stopping at a door, which David opened with a key card before they both slipped inside. The murmur in the crowd grew louder, laced now with the first notes of scandal. Then came the audio. The screens remained on the image of the closed hotel room door, but now a sound file began to play. The voices of David and Sarah amplified to fill every corner of the vast, silent room. It was a phone call, recovered and cleaned by Marcus, its clarity unforgiving. "Did you get the files on the Nightingale project?" David's voice asked, sharp and conspiratorial. Sarah's voice replied, breathy and eager. "I put them on the drive like you said." She suspects nothing. She's been so wrapped up in the quarterly reports, she hasn't even noticed. The audience was completely silent now. This was not a simple, sordid affair. This was a conspiracy. At the head table, the color began to drain from David's face. Sarah looked as if she had been slapped, her hand flying to her mouth. The video transitioned seamlessly. The image of the hotel door was replaced by a simple audio waveform, elegant and stark against the black screen. A new phone call began to play. This time, it was David and his mother. "The power of attorney documents she signed last year give me all the latitude I need," David's voice explained. "She thinks it's for tax efficiency." As he spoke, the words "power of attorney" appeared on the screen in bold white letters. Margaret's reedy, avaricious voice came next. "And the shares? Are you sure you'll have enough to force her out?" she asked. "Don't worry." David's voice oozed with condescending confidence. "Just a few more months, Mother. A few more months, and Innovate Dynamics, all of it, will finally be ours." The word ours filled the screen, hanging in the air like a death sentence. Margaret, at the head table, let out a small, strangled gasp, her carefully composed face crumbling into a mask of pure, horrified disbelief. She was listening to her own treachery, exposed to the world. The pace of the video quickened. The trap was now fully sprung, and it was time to reveal the mechanics of the crime. The screen filled with a slick, mercilessly clear presentation. Animated graphics, designed by Evelyn's team, showed the flow of money from Innovate Dynamics accounts, moving through a series of complex transactions before landing in the offshore accounts of a shell corporation, Apex Holdings. Bank statements flashed on the screen, with David's and Margaret's names highlighted as the sole beneficiaries. The investors in the room were no longer just watching a family drama. They were witnessing a multi-million-dollar corporate heist. Their faces hardened, their shock turning to cold, professional fury. For the employees, the scientists, the engineers, the people who had poured their lives into the company, the next part was the most brutal. Screenshots of the Innovate Dynamics R&D server appeared, with arrows showing the systematic, nightly downloads of proprietary data. A list of the stolen intellectual property scrolled down the screen, a roll call of their greatest achievements. And at the bottom of the list, the crown jewel, Project Nightingale. It was a moment of collective, professional violation. The work of their minds, the future of their company, had been stolen by the man who was smiling and shaking their hands just an hour before. The video reached its crescendo. The final piece of evidence was not a document or a recording, but a video. Julian's team had planted a micro camera in the library of the Hayes home. The footage was from a few weeks ago. It showed David and Margaret standing by the fireplace, raising glasses of champagne in a toast. "To Project Chimera," David said, a cruel, triumphant smirk on his face. "The golden goose she delivered right into our hands." Margaret laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "She never saw it coming," she crowed. "All that intelligence, and she still lets her heart rule her head." David took a sip of his champagne, his eyes glittering with contempt. "I told you, Mother," he said, his voice dripping with the disdain that Amelia now knew so well. "She's emotional, not strategic." That final line, emotional, not strategic, echoed through the ballroom as the video cut to black. The silence that followed was a living thing, a heavy, suffocating blanket of pure shock. Then, slowly, the main lights in the ballroom began to rise, not with a celebratory brightness, but with the cold, unforgiving glare of an interrogation room. The light exposed the scene at the head table in all its raw, unfiltered horror. David was ashen-faced, his jaw slack, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape that did not exist. Margaret was trembling, her face a grotesque collage of fury and humiliation. Sarah was openly weeping, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking. They were trapped, exposed, and utterly ruined, pinned in place by the weight of 500 pairs of staring eyes. The party was over, the music was dead, the laughter was gone. All that remained was the wreckage. And standing on the stage, looking down upon it all, was Amelia. Her face was calm, her expression unreadable. She was not a vengeful goddess, gloating over their destruction. She was something far more terrifying. She was a force of nature, a quiet, patient reckoning that had finally, inevitably, arrived. The unveiling was complete. For a long, suspended moment, the only sound in the grand ballroom was the faint, electronic hum of the darkened screens. The 500 guests were a frozen tableau of shock, a sea of stunned faces illuminated by the cold, impartial glare of the house lights. The silence was not empty. It was heavy, dense with the weight of the ruin they had all just witnessed. Then, the silence broke. It was not a shout, but the sharp, distinct crack of a champagne flute shattering on the marble floor, dropped from a nerveless hand. It was the starting pistol for the pandemonium. The first wave to crash upon the head table was the press. The journalists, who had been lazily covering a corporate anniversary, now realized they were at the epicenter of the biggest scandal of the year. Camera flashes erupted in a blinding, strobe-like frenzy, turning the scene into a series of stark, overexposed snapshots of disgrace. Microphones were thrust forward like weapons. "Mr. Hayes, are the allegations in the video true? Can you comment on the offshore accounts? Were you in a relationship with your wife's assistant?" The questions were a merciless barrage, a cacophony of accusation. The second wave was the investors. The polite, smiling facades of the financial elite dissolved into masks of grim, calculated fury. They didn't shout. Their actions were quieter and far more devastating. Men and women in bespoke suits turned their backs on the head table, their thumbs flying across the screens of their phones. They were not texting gossip. They were texting their brokers. Sell. Sell all holdings in Innovate Dynamics. Now, in those first 90 seconds, a virtual tidal wave of sell orders was unleashed, a digital execution that would wipe billions off the company's market value by the time the stock market opened in the morning. The third wave, the quietest and most wounded, was the employees. They stared at the head table, their faces a mixture of disgust, betrayal, and a strange, dawning sense of liberation. Their loyalty, once divided or confused, now coalesced, turning as one toward the woman standing alone on the stage. In the center of this maelstrom, the crumbling kingdom had its three final desperate moments. David, his face a ghastly shade of gray, scrambled to his feet. He raised his hands, attempting to project an authority he no longer possessed. This is a fabrication," he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak against the roaring chaos. "A vicious, elaborate lie." But no one was listening. His charm, his most reliable weapon, had been rendered useless, melted away by the irrefutable acid of the truth. Margaret reacted not with panic, but with a final desperate surge of venomous rage. She too got to her feet, her emerald necklace quivering. She pointed a trembling finger not at the crowd, but at Amelia, who was now calmly descending the steps from the stage. "You," Margaret shrieked, her voice a shrill, cracking instrument of hate. "You ungrateful witch. After everything we gave you, after we welcomed you into our family." Her words were a confession, an admission of the very entitlement and arrogance that had led to her downfall. Sarah simply dissolved. All the smugness and ambition drained out of her, leaving behind a sobbing, hysterical girl in a red dress. She covered her face and stumbled away from the table, pushing blindly through the crowd, desperate to escape the hundreds of pairs of eyes that felt like physical blows. As Amelia reached the floor, the chaotic sea of people parted for her. The noise seemed to recede from her immediate vicinity, creating a pocket of intense, focused silence around her. She walked, not with haste, but with a deliberate, unyielding pace, directly toward her husband. He flinched as she approached. She stopped a foot in front of him. She did not raise her voice. Her words were quiet, precise, and for his ears only. "It's over, David." From beside her, a man in a dark, conservative suit stepped forward. It was her lead attorney. He held out a fine leather portfolio. Amelia took it. "These," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion, "are the divorce papers. You will be out of the house by noon tomorrow." She then handed him a second document. "And this is a temporary restraining order, effective immediately. You will not come within 500 feet of me, my home, or my office again." Her lawyer then turned and served a similar set of documents to the sputtering, speechless Margaret. It was in that moment, as the personal, final blow was delivered, that a new presence made itself known. The main doors of the ballroom swung open, and a group of calm, authoritative men and women in dark suits entered. They were not party guests. Their faces were grim, their movements professional. They were corporate crime investigators from the U.S. Attorney's Office, alerted by Arthur's legal team the moment the video had begun to play. The chaos in the room began to quiet as they made their way purposefully toward the head table. Their lead agent, a calm woman with intelligent eyes, approached David. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice polite but firm, "we have a few questions for you. We'd appreciate it if you'd come with us." And across the room, standing near a pillar, Leo and Chloe Hayes watched the entire implosion. They had come to the gala expecting to be proud of their father. Instead, they watched a horror film starring their own family. They saw the proof of his affair, they heard the evidence of his crimes, and they witnessed the utter contempt he and their grandmother held for their mother. Their world, built on a foundation of effortless luxury, had just been revealed as a sham, financed by theft and lies. They looked at their father, pale and sweating, as he was escorted away by federal agents. They looked at their grandmother, a broken, shrieking ruin. Then they looked at their mother standing tall and composed in the eye of the storm she had unleashed. In that moment, the choice that had always been clouded was now starkly, painfully clear. Their lives had just been shattered, and only one person had the strength to help them pick up the pieces. The kingdom had not just fallen, it had been utterly annihilated. The guests were now fleeing, carrying with them the story that would dominate the news cycle for months. The beautiful ballroom was a wreck, a battlefield of abandoned purses, overturned chairs, and the ghost of a celebration. And in the center of it all, Amelia stood, not as a victim, not as a victor, but as a survivor. The war was over, and in the deafening silence of the aftermath, she was finally, truly free. The months that followed the gala were not a celebration, but a quiet, methodical cleansing. The kingdom, having been so spectacularly shattered, was now being swept away. The media frenzy eventually subsided, replaced by the slow, grinding gears of the justice system. For David and Margaret Hayes, there was no escape. The evidence presented in the video was not just publicly humiliating, it was a digital, ironclad confession. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable proof of fraud, embezzlement, and corporate espionage, David took a plea bargain to avoid a drawn-out trial. His charm was useless in a federal courtroom. He was sentenced to 8 years in a minimum security prison, a stunning fall from grace that left him stripped of his wealth, his reputation, and his freedom. Margaret, due to her age, was spared prison time, but not punishment. She was sentenced to house arrest. Her assets were seized, and she was left to live out her days in a small, rented condo, a disgraced and forgotten pariah in the society she had once prized above all else. Sarah, the loyal assistant, found herself entangled in her own legal battles and was professionally excommunicated, a cautionary tale whispered in corporate offices across the country. Their ruin was not loud and explosive, but quiet, total, and absolute. While their world was dismantled by law, Amelia's was being carefully rebuilt by choice. The first, most difficult act of reconstruction involved her children. A few weeks after the gala, Leo and Chloe came to her. They did not come for money or to ask about their inheritance. They came humbled, their faces etched with a shame and a maturity they had never before possessed. They found her not in her vast, sterile mansion, which she had already put up for sale, but in the cozy, light-filled kitchen of a much smaller, warmer home she had bought for herself. They apologized. The words were clumsy and tearful, but for the first time, they were genuine. They apologized, not just for forgetting her birthday, but for a lifetime of taking her for granted, for never truly seeing the woman who had given them everything. Amelia listened, and when they were finished, she did something that surprised them. She forgave them, completely, and without reservation. But her forgiveness came with new terms. "I will always love you," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "My support for you is unconditional, but my bank account is not. The life you knew is over. Your trust funds are gone, liquidated to help repay the company's investors. What you build from now on, you will build with your own 2 hands." It was the hardest and most loving thing she had ever done. She was no longer their provider. She was their mother, finally teaching them the lesson of self-worth that she herself had been forced to learn in the crucible of betrayal. Her final piece of closure came on a cool autumn afternoon. She met Arthur Harrison on the terrace of his secluded country estate, a place of quiet gardens and ancient trees. She had come to thank him, to try and find the words to express her gratitude for the man who had, for all intents and purposes, saved her life. He listened patiently, a small, kind smile on his face, and when she was finished, he simply shook his head. "You have it wrong, Amelia," he said softly, gesturing to a chair beside him. "I was not repaying your kindness. I was paying a very old debt." He then told her a story about a brilliant, honest young engineer he had known 40 years ago, a man with a mind like a diamond and a heart that was perhaps too trusting. This engineer had a partner, a man with a famous family name and a talent for sales, but with a heart full of shadows. Together, they built a small but innovative engineering firm. And when the company was on the verge of a massive breakthrough, the charming partner used his legal connections and family influence to systematically cheat the brilliant engineer out of his shares, pushing him out and taking all the credit and the profits for himself. The engineer was left with nothing. His name was Daniel Novak. He was Amelia's father. And the partner who betrayed him, the man who built his family's renewed fortune on the back of that theft, was Jonathan Hayes, David's father. Amelia sat in stunned silence, the world tilting on its axis for the second time in a year. I was a young investor back then, Arthur continued, his eyes distant with memory. I saw what was happening. I knew it was wrong, but I was not yet powerful enough to stop it. I never forgave myself for my inaction. Helping you, Amelia. It was never about charity. It was about justice, a half-century late. It was for your father. Amelia finally understood. The universe had not sent her a random savior. It had sent her a link to her own history, a quiet act of cosmic justice that had been set in motion long before she was born. Her simple act of kindness on a rainy birthday had not been an accident. It had been destiny, the closing of a circle, the final settling of a forgotten ledger. She now stands as the sole, undisputed leader of a stronger, leaner, Innovate Dynamics, a company she has remade in her own image, resilient, honest, and visionary. The story of her quiet, methodical triumph has become a legend in the business world. She is no longer just respected, she is revered. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, she looks out from her office window at the sprawling city lights, a silent kingdom of glass and steel, and reflects on the silence that nearly destroyed her. It is in that quiet reflection that the ultimate truth of her journey becomes clear. So let this be a lesson. Never underestimate the quiet dignity of a person who has endured too much. Never mistake their silence for acceptance or their patience for weakness. For when they finally decide that enough is enough, their will becomes an unbreakable force, and their judgment, a verdict from which there is no appeal. Thank you for listening to the story from GIA.TNHUS. Justice takes many forms, and sometimes, the most profound victories are the ones won in the quietest of battles. We will see you in the next story.